Welcome everyone. Here we are back. This week I saw something that really captured my attention, and so now it has become the study for this week. We're going to be in the book of Genesis to start. Genesis chapter 3. So not quite all the way back to in the beginning, but almost. Got the Bible? You get yours. You know what to do. Because here we go. You're going to start right at the top of chapter 3 and verse 1. Of all the wild creatures the eternal God had created, the serpent was the craftiest. And the serpent said to the woman, "Is it true that God has forbidden you to eat fruits from the trees of the garden?" Eve said, "No, serpent. God said we are free to eat the fruit from the trees in the garden. We are granted access to any variety and all amounts of fruit with one exception. The fruit from the tree found in the center of the garden. God instructed us not to eat or touch the fruit of that tree or we would die." The serpent looks at Eve and says, "Die? You'll not die. God's playing games with you. The truth is, God knows the day you eat the fruit from that tree, you will awaken something powerful in you and become like Him, possessing the knowledge of both good and evil." That must have got Eve thinking, because now we see in verse 6, Eve approaches the tree. She eyes its fruit, coveted its mouth-watering wisdom, granting beauty. She plucked the fruit from the tree and she ate. She then offered the fruit to her husband, who was close by, and he ate as well. Suddenly their eyes were opened to a reality previously unknown. For the first time they sensed their vulnerability and rushed to hide their naked bodies, stitching fig leaves into crude loincloths. Then they heard the sound of God walking in the cool, misting shadows of the garden, and the man and his wife took cover among the trees and hid from God. Now we know this. We know this story. It's very familiar to most people, even if you're not a part of the church. A lot of people have heard this story. And almost every time I've heard the story, if it's been taught, if it's been preached, what happens? Everybody points a finger and say, "This is where sin started. That's the point of the whole thing, right here. We get to badmouth Adam and Eve because it's all their fault." And that's all the further anybody ever takes it. Except we're missing something. This is something I heard this week. I'm going to share it with you, and you see how it rings true. We concentrate on the problem is sin. Yes, it is. Sin is a massive problem. But what was the problem before the sin? I've never heard one preacher, not one Bible teacher ever talk about this. The problem is, the serpent comes and says, "Is it true?" Now we know from Scripture, Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden a lot. I mean, right after this. The serpent's still there. And they hear God walking in the garden, because this is something God does all the time. So, the serpent asked them a question. Is it true? Now, Eve and Adam, because it tells us Adam's not far away. Well, he's right there. He can see where Eve's at. Now, if you're not supposed to eat of a tree, you're probably not going to want to be within 100 yards of that tree. Well, obviously, Adam's close, so he's closer than 100 yards. Eve's closer than 100 yards. So the problem is, Satan comes and says, "Is it true?" Then the problem begins, the real problem. Adam and Eve didn't say, "Wait a minute. We walk with God every day. Let's ask Him." They would have waited a moment, or even maybe they just would have perked their ears up and said, "Here He comes. Let's ask Him. Hey, God, is it true you've forbidden us to eat the fruits of all the trees and everything?" Because this serpent here, he's asking us questions, and I was ready to tell him, but I don't want to miss anything. Because then the serpent, when he knows he's got Eve's attention, he doubles down and he says, because Eve says that, well, God said we would die. And serpent says, die? And remember, there has been no death up to this point. So when God tells Eve, die, I'm not sure what she understands. I'm not sure what Adam understands. But then the serpent says, well, die, because he knows they don't have any idea about death. I mean, they've never experienced it, never seen it. And so he starts asking these questions. Well, certainly God doesn't mean that. Again, I mean, look at the progression here. I mean, they're not waiting like a week or something and all of a sudden God shows up. This seems like pretty close proximity, and there's God. All they had to do was do what they've always done. Because when we look here, Adam and Eve are asking God all kinds of questions. Every single question they have isn't written down in Scripture, but we know God's there with them. There's going to be tons of questions. What do kids do? They ask questions. And that's not a problem. It's because they're kids. They don't know. Adam and Eve are kids. They don't know. But here's the fatal mistake. They don't go to God and say, God, we don't actually understand this die thing. What about that? And God would have been very happy to explain it to them. This is what I meant. And he would be looking right at the serpent. Now you know what I meant. But there was the problem. They were there alone. Satan has this strategy. Nothing has changed. Here's the garden. Here's today in the 21st century. Satan's strategy hasn't changed. Same precise strategy. Isolate you, isolate me, ask us questions, get us wondering. Bam! Sin. Did the devil make us do it? No. We were right there. We had all the choices, just like Adam and Eve. We could have walked away, but we did not. Now, this is a shorter study this week. I want you to take this, grab a hold of this, and start looking at the events that are happening each day. And then you look and see when you were tempted to just start answering a question, wait a minute, stop. I'm going to ask God. And I will get back to you next week on what I find. You can certainly drop down in the comments and tell me what you find. I'll see you again.